It's funny, isn't it? We humans, we tend to think we've got the world figured out, like our way is the way.
Yeah.
But when it comes to something like gender, well, let's just say there's a whole universe of experiences out there. And today we're going on a deep dive to explore that.
I'm ready when you are.
Perfect. Because our guide for this is, well, let's just say it's an academic paper unlike any other I've come across. It's called A Treatise on Gender Complexity Across Sentient Species. Catchy, right?
Definitely intriguing.
Oh, and I almost forgot the author's name. Professor Thalorian Stormwhisper. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
It does have a certain ring to it, but honestly, the work itself is even more fascinating. Professor Stormwhisper, along with their co-authors, they've combined traditional scholarship with, get this, magical research methods.
Magic A&D scholarship. Okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with a topic this big?
Well, we could start with a species many think they have all figured out. The dwarves.
Dwarves.
Yeah.
Sturdy, stoic, traditional, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But that's where things get interesting. See, dwarven society. Well, it's a matriarchy.
Wait, seriously? As in, women run the show?
Absolutely. And I'm not just talking about a few women in positions of power. We're talking full-on women-led society. Dwarven women, they're the warriors, the strategists, the leaders of their clans. They command respect.
Wow. See, this is what I love about these deep dives. Totally flips the script on what you thought you knew. But I have to ask, how did this even come to be? I mean, is it just a dwarven women are strong kind of thing?
It's more nuanced than that. Professor Stormwhisper suggests their societal structure might be connected to their deep connection with the Earth itself, their mastery over forging.
Forging, you mean like weapons and armor?
Exactly. Creating these things, it's an act of creation, but it demands immense strength, both physical and mental.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yep.
So it's possible that this very act, something so central to dwarven culture, it shaped how they view gender roles.
It's a fascinating hypothesis, isn't it? Makes you wonder how much our environment, our history, shapes what we consider masculine or feminine.
It really does make you think. But speaking of challenging norms, the High Elves, they seem to take it to a whole other level. The paper describes their approach to gender as, well, incredibly complex, like even beyond our human understanding of categorization.
What makes the High Elves so captivating is their mastery over magic, which allows them to, in a sense, transcend the limitations of physical form as we understand it.
You're saying they can just change?
In a way, yes. They can shift their appearances, blur the lines between genders. Imagine a society where the concept of a rigid gender binary simply doesn't exist. That's the reality for High Elves.
That's wild. So it's not just that they have different ideas about gender. Their very biology is fluid thanks to magic. That's just mind-boggling. And to add to that, the paper mentions that male High Elves are incredibly rare and often exhibit traits humans would typically associate with femininity. It's like their entire society is a beautiful contradiction to our rigid human ideas about gender.
And it's crucial to remember that this isn't just speculation or storytelling. These observations by Professor Stormwhisper are based on years of meticulous magical research and observation.
Which makes you wonder how much of what we perceive as natural is actually cultural conditioning.
Exactly. It really calls into question our whole understanding, doesn't it?
It does. But what about the Wood Elves? I've always pictured them as mysterious, living in harmony with nature. How does their approach to gender fit into all of this?
The Wood Elves, perhaps more than any other species, they really highlight this concept of gender as a social construct. You see, within their own society, they too embrace a fluid approach to gender, much like the High Elves, but through different means. But here's where it gets really interesting. When interacting with the outside world, humans, dwarves, other species with stricter norms, they adapt.
Adapt how?
They take on more fixed gender roles depending on who they're dealing with.
So they're like chameleons, changing their presentation to fit in.
Precisely. Professor Stormwhisper seems to suggest this is a strategic adaptation, a way to navigate a world that, let's face it, often tries to force everyone into neat little boxes.
It's a fascinating strategy, but it makes me wonder, what does it even mean to perform gender roles so strategically? Is it self-preservation? A commentary on those rigid norms? Something else entirely? I don't know. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. But isn't it fascinating? We've got dwarves flipping the script on traditional gender roles, High Elves seemingly transcending those roles altogether, and Wood Elves expertly navigating a world obsessed with binaries.
So talk about a spectrum of experiences. And I think this is just the beginning. It really highlights how much we just assume is, just the way things are.
It's a good reminder for all of us, though, isn't it? Even if we can't, like, reshape our bodies with magic or blend into forests like the elves, it's about recognizing that our way of seeing gender, it's not the only way, or even the right way, really. It's just one perspective among many.
So much to consider. But how do we actually apply any of this? We're not dwarves or elves. We don't have their history or their magic. Does any of this even matter to us back here in the, I don't know, the human world?
It absolutely matters, and maybe even more so because of that difference. If you think about it, what Professor Storm Whisper's research gives us is a whole new lens to examine our own society's assumptions about gender.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, take the dwarves, for example. This reverence for the strength and leadership of women, especially in such a physically demanding area, it kind of throws a wrench in that traditional human association of strength and leadership with masculinity, doesn't it?
That's true. It's like they flipped the script on us.
Exactly. And then you have the high elves, who seem to have moved beyond gender as this defining characteristic altogether, at least in the way that we understand it. It's a good reminder that our physical forms, they don't have to dictate our identities or limit our potential for that matter.
Right, right. It's almost like seeing ourselves in a funhouse mirror. It's familiar, but something's a little off, which I think makes us reevaluate what we thought we knew about ourselves.
That's a great way to put it. This kind of research, it forces us to really look inward, examine our own biases. Maybe our understanding of gender is a lot more limited than we realize.
So where do we even go from here? This has been a fascinating conversation, but I'll be honest, it's a lot to process.
I understand, it can be overwhelming. But I think if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's to be curious, be open to new ideas. And I think most importantly, be kind to yourself and others as we all try to figure out this whole complex and ever-evolving thing we call gender.
I love that. Curiosity, openness, kindness. Such simple but powerful ideas.
They really are. And I think if we approach these conversations with curiosity and openness, we can start to create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected for who they are.
I love that. Couldn't have said it better myself. And as mind-blowing as all of this research is, it's important to remember that we've just scratched the surface here. We've only looked at 3 species, really.
And that's what I find so incredibly exciting. If dwarves, high elves, and wood elves have such unique and complex relationships with gender, I mean, imagine the incredible diversity that must exist across all the other species in the universe.
It's like we've opened this door to a gigantic, unexplored library filled with infinite possibilities.
Infinite possibilities. I love that. And to think we almost went through this whole thing without cracking open this book. I mean, it's easy to assume that our way of understanding gender is the only way.
That's so true. But it just goes to show the power of looking at things from a new angle, challenging those old assumptions we all have. Professor Storm Whisper's research, I think it reminds us that the world is a much stranger and more wondrous place than we tend to give it credit for. I couldn't agree more. So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into, well, gender across species, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners? What should they really hold on to?
I think it boils down to a few core things. Understanding, acceptance, and a willingness to really examine our own biases. That's key. We've only just scratched the surface when it comes to the sheer diversity of gender expression, even within our own species.
It's pretty humbling when you really think about it. And it makes me think about what you said earlier, curiosity, openness, kindness. Those are some pretty good values to live by, I think.
I think so too. And maybe, just maybe, if we can approach these conversations, any conversation really, with curiosity and openness, we might be able to create a world where everyone feels seen and heard, respected for who they are.
Beautifully said. Couldn't agree more. And to all our listeners out there, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, keep challenging those assumptions. Until next time, may your deep dives be filled with wonder and discovery.